Anime finished this year number 54. Scott Pilgrim takes off. 10 out of 10. Okay, so this is a little bit of a weird one to talk about, and as a result, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about some other Scott Pilgrim media before actually getting into this one. You see, I really love the Scott Pilgrim comic series. It's something that I've liked from the first time I read it, and a lot of the characters are near and dear to my heart. I like the movie, but it is very much a different beast from the comics, faithful to the extreme in the start, only to very quickly move into something that's quite different, a byproduct of the comics not being complete when the movie started production and them having to script quite a lot of it off of the author's notes. I must admit that while I have liked the movie for Edgar Wright's directing choices and the cast, there are a few things about it that always bothered me and have had me feeling like the comics are the better told story. Like the way that the extremely condensed timeline meant some characters that would be pivotal to Scott's development were downplayed or cut entirely, and the way that the compression meant bringing the story to bare essentials and little else. That simplification leads to my biggest problem with the film. There is a not insignificant portion of people who walk away from the movie feeling like Scott is a pretty cool guy and a badass. Looking to the comics proves that that was never meant to be the case. Scott is an unemployed loser jackass who is just barely tolerated by his own friends. He's dating a high school girl that is 5 years younger than him in the sense that he's leading her on because he wants to be in a relationship, but is willing to jump at the first sign that another girl shows interest in him. Scott sucks. And that's the point. The whole comic series is about him developing into a halfway decent guy and growing up, even if it is maybe a little too late. Scott grows, confronts the fact that he has been terrible to just about every woman he has ever dated, and comes out the other side actually ready to start an adult relationship for the first time in his life. Sadly, it's clear that everything to do with that was lost on a certain subset of people, so when approaching the series for another adaptation, I think it's pretty obvious that Brian Lee O'Malley decided the time for subtlety was over. Once again, this is a case where the start of the adaptation is very faithful, only for it to trend in a different direction at a certain point. This time, the delineation point is the end of the first episode, where I won't really spoil the exact happenings, but I encourage anyone who is a fan of the comic series to go and give it a watch and just save the rest of this video for watching later. This is not the Scott Pilgrim comic series in any form. It's an entirely new story starring the same cast of characters that uses a strange what-if scenario to explore other angles and allow other avenues for development. While Scott does get to grow as a person, it's not quite in the same amount as the source material and has him confronting completely different issues in the process. It's a new angle on him that I appreciate, though I admit I can't completely believe he's reached quite the same level of personal growth as comic Scott managed to. Instead, the larger focus is put on Ramona this time, which I think is something that was a little needed. The comics do a good job at making her a somewhat layered person by the end, but the movie doesn't manage that very well, so this is really just picking up that slack. There is a decent amount of focus put on the reasons for why Ramona has the exes that she does, the way that those relationships came together and fell apart, leaving her to do her own confronting about how she's behaved in past relationships in a sort of parallel to the path that Scott took in the comics. Not to mention, her exploration of bisexuality isn't treated as a joke this time, but as a moment in time where she might not have handled things as well as she could have, leading to some completely understandable hurt feelings. By the end of the season, with the elements that come in the last few episodes to give us the glimpse of the future that might have been, this really gives the idea that while the original series was about starting a relationship, this is thinking a little more about the work that goes into maintaining it in the long term, how that is something that takes work and effort and understanding to make happen. It's not that people get together and that's the whole thing solved. I can't help but wonder if this is something that, years after the original release, O'Malley is ruminating on, an experiment of how this story could have been told differently. There is a part of me that wishes that we had gotten a straight adaptation of the comics as someone who does enjoy them, but I'm supremely glad to have this as well. It is a gorgeously made series that really only has a few short spots in the middle where it drags. I do highly recommend this to existing Scott Pilgrim fans, but I don't think I really can for those who don't have any experience with the series already. This is in many ways a work that is in conversation with its source material, so you're going to get infinitely more out of it if you've engaged with that already. This is perfectly watchable and understandable without it, sure, but I do think that there is a layer you'll miss if you make this your entry point.